It all started with this sweater, the one I'm wearing right now. When it was time to seam the sides and the sleeves, I wanted the seam to be invisible, flat, stretchy, and preferably reversible. No seams I knew fit the bill, so I started experimenting with different options, and eventually I found a seam that is almost perfect. It is based on a lovely embroidery stitch called square chain, and in this video I'll show you how to make it. Here are the swatches that will be my guinea pigs for this tutorial. They're both knit in stockinette stitch with no selvages. I avoided selvages because I know that this seam works best on edges that have either slip stitch selvage or no selvage at all. It is logical to make the seam using the same yarn that we used for making the project, but in this tutorial I'm going to use the yarn that is in different color to make it easier to see how the seam is made. The seam uses a lot of yarn, so the piece of yarn that we'll need for seaming should be about 5 times longer than the length of the future seam. So basically the length of the side of the swatch. So I'll take my yarn and measure the length 5 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I'll leave some more for the tails and cut the yarn. Thread this yarn into a wool needle and we'll be all set. Okay, here we go. The seaming starts at the cast on edge. This way the chains that we create along the way will be very similar to the knit stitches. See, the knit stitches, they start from the cast on edge and go up, and the chains that we're going to create, that will be very similar, and that will make the seam invisible. Align both pieces of the fabric side by side like this, with the knit side of the work facing to you. Now we need to secure the yarn at the very beginning of the seam. To do that, insert the wool needle from back to front into a spot that is 1 stitch away from the edge at the very bottom of the piece on the right. So we have the left piece and the right piece. So we look at the edge, find the spot that is 1 stitch away from the edge, and find a spot that is at the very bottom of this swatch, like this. Then pull the yarn through, but not all the way through. Leave a small tail so you could weave it in later on. Now insert the wool needle from front to back into a similar spot. So we're looking again 1 stitch away from the edge and the spot that is at the very bottom of the other swatch, the one that is on the left. So we go in there front to back, and then we go, oh, I twisted my yarn a bit. And then we go again into the same spot we already used on the swatch on the right, and we go from back to front like this. Basically, we are making a big loop that kind of connects these 2 swatches. And pull it tight. But make sure the tail stays here, because sometimes when you pull it really tight, then the tail would just unravel and then your loop will be gone. So don't do that, okay? Now let's do the same thing. So we go front to back here and back to front on the other swatch like this. But this time don't pull the loop too tight. Leave a small loop like this. And then insert the wool needle from back to front. Basically it's the direction towards the cast on edge, into that loop, and then pull it tighter like this. So that's the setup, that's the beginning of the seam, and now we have the yarn secured, and now we can move to actually seaming the sides. From now on we'll be using the stitches that are at the very edge of each knitted piece. So we'll be looking at the first stitch over here and then the first stitch over there. Let me show where it is. If it is stockinette stitch, you will need to untwisted somehow, because it curls in, you know, stockinette does that. So we are finding that first stitch, because I don't have selvages here. These first stitches, they're not nice looking. That's why we need selvages, but for this seam they are perfect. We won't use the whole stitch. We'll be using, you know, each stitch has two legs, right? Like this one and then the other one, but we'll be using just one leg, the one that is further from the edge. So in this particular stitch we'll be using this leg, see? And then on the other side we'll be using, so this is the stitch, we don't take the one that is at the very edge, we're looking at the one that is further from the edge. Let's call it the working leg, okay? So now here's what we do. Insert the wool needle into the same loop from which the yarn comes out. So remember this second loop that we made, and the yarn is in it. So we insert the wool needle into that same loop, like this. Then insert the needle into the working leg of the next stitch of the piece on the left, so this one, and we are looking on the working leg of the stitch here. It would be here. And then into the working leg of the next stitch on the right. So we're going in here. See, in this one shot we go through 3 strands. So it's the loop itself, and then one leg of the stitch on the left and one leg of the stitch on the right. And we are always going into the leg that is further from the edge, the one that we agreed we'll call the working leg. Now pull the yarn through, leaving the loop. So don't pull it all the way through, leave the loop. And now, same way as we already did, insert the wool needle from back to front into that loop, and then pull it tighter, but not too tight. So this chain, this is the first chain that we already created. It should be about the same size as the stitch itself. So the stitch of the fabric, let's see, the knit stitch, it's about this big, see, in my case. So I'm gonna leave the loop big enough so it's about the same size. So this one is a bit smaller, so I'm gonna pull it a bit and then form a nicer loop. And that's how we go. So let's do it again. Insert the wool needle into the loop, then into the next into the working leg of the next stitch on the left, and then the working leg of the next stitch on the right. Pull it through, go inside the loop. Make sure the loop is not twisted. See, this one is twisted and I can see it, and you probably can see it too. So I will untwist it, make sure that it is all nice and flat, and then I go into that loop. Make sure it's not twisted, okay? And let's do it again. Into the loop, one leg on the left, one leg on the right, pull it through, and then leave the loop, untwist it if necessary. Sometimes it depends on the yarn, sometimes it could just be open and nice, sometimes it might twist, and pull it to make the stitch about the same size as the stitches of the fabric itself. One more thing that I want to show you is how do you know which one is the next stitch, right? Because it's a bit confusing. So I'm gonna go inside the loop and make another stitch, and then when it's time to pick up the leg of the next stitch, look at the edge. See, this one is already taken. We already have something sticking out of it, right? It's the seam. So the next leg, the next stitch would be over here. This would be our next one. So I'm going into the loop and then into that next stitch, and then I look in the same way. I examine the edge of the piece on the right, and the next stitch over here would be this one, and pull it through, leave a loop, open it up and go in there and make the stitch about the same size as the stitches of the fabric. I'll make a few more stitches so you could better see how the seam works, and then we'll take a closer look at the seam. And here we are. I made about 2/3 of the seam, and now you can clearly see how lovely it is. It mimics the look of the knit stitches, and it will be invisible on stockinette stitch and on ribbing. Here it is visible definitely because we're using a different colored yarn, but if the yarn is the same color, it will blend in pretty seamlessly. For example, I made a similar stitch on two swatches made with 1x1 rib, and I haven't finished the seam on purpose to show where the seam is, because if I cover this part, see, the seam basically hides, and you cannot easily tell where it is, and that's great. That makes it invisible. And here's how it looks on the wrong side. Not really fully invisible, but pretty close to that. It looks really nice. Besides, the seam is absolutely flat. So there is no bulk like the one we usually get when we use the mattress stitch. This one is absolutely flat. You can see there is no bulk. And here's how it looks on ribbing, and that's how flat it looks on the stockinette stitch. See, same thing. It is pretty flat. See, like this. And that's how it looks on the wrong side. On stockinette stitch, you cannot say it's reversible, but it's not bad. Not bad at all. And another good thing about this seam is that it is also stretchy. See, it stretches same as the fabric, because we basically mimic the look and the feel of the knit stitch. So it's pretty stretchy, and it does not jam the fabric at all. So you won't get your seams pocket at the edges or the sides. So overall, it's a great seam for our knitting skill set. And here it is, a seam I discovered when I was finishing this sweater. I also made step-by-step photo instructions. If you need them, follow the link in the description. Thank you for watching and have a wonderful week. I'll see you next Thursday.